Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, great Biafrans and lovers of freedom. This is Radio Biafra HAUSA-SERVICE coming to you through Radio Biafra London. My name remains Mazi Chinedu from Olu province of Biafra land, and we are here live and direct. Today is the 16th day of May 2024. Therefore, I welcome each and every one of you to welcome your friends and well-wishers onto this hallowed platform, our rallying point, where we worship. As you may know, today this is the second day of the Biafra education awareness dissemination. Therefore, without taking any much time, because you all know that we are in our month of heroes and heroines remembrance. Our Heroes and Heroines Remembrance Month, which we pick up on the 30th day of May. We remember people like Ikonso. We remember those that died that we may live. Therefore, that day in Biafra land on the 30th day of May, there will be total lockdown. It doesn't matter how the zoo use their agents to try to bastardize our lockdown, but this 30th May is a no-go area. It will be a complete lockdown. Therefore, we will continue in this Biafra education, awareness, and dissemination, which talks about our history. Because we will be writing our history by ourselves. No more depending on our enemies or foreigners to write our history. That is why I am joined by Mazi, Dr. Ukachi. That is the second day, which is today, because it goes on 14th, that is day before yesterday, 16th, 18th, until next week also. Therefore, without taking any much time, I will hand over the platform to Mazi Ukachi. Mazi, please take over the microphone. Welcome to the program. There we go.
Thank you very much, Mazi Jonathan, and everyone listening. You're all welcome this evening for a second bead lecture. This time we're targeting the second military coup in Nigeria, which occurred on the 29th of July 1966. We talked last occasion 2 days ago, on the January 15th coup, which was a coup carried out by Nigerian nationalists who want to sort out what was happening in Nigeria at the time. And our issue now is, how was it labeled an evil coup, and the subsequent killing that went on afterwards. So my greetings to you all. It's under BEAD, Biafra Education Awareness Dissemination. As Mazi Jonathan said, we're here to share our history. And if we did not disseminate it, no one else would. So when you come to talk about our history, I'm going to highlight some of the essential issues within this period. If you imagine it from January until July, when the second coup occurred. So we're just going to put in some information between those two dates, and give you something which most people would not have heard of about the two coups that occurred.
Mazi, please, before you continue, let me, Mazi, Ukachi, please. I am suggesting that you also simplify your accent, and sometimes because
okay. I'll slow down and explain it properly. Yes, as we're going to, this is just a group of information we've gathered together. Speak as slowly as I can, because they're important history. The key thing I want to share today will be the fact that there were two coups on the 29th of July. We know about the so-called Araba revenge coup, return match coup, they called it 29th. But there were actually two coups, which I'm going to highlight. So let's begin then. And this talking on this Hello platform would not be possible if it wasn't for Mazi Nnamdi Kanu. So we have to honor him and pray for him to be released very soon. So in my investigation and reading, I found that, first of all, according to the available evidence at the time, as soon as the coup occurred, as soon as the coup of January 15th occurred, what actually happened, it was hailed, most people greeted it throughout the whole Federation of Nigeria. The disturbances, why? Because the disturbances in the western region and in the TV area of the north, that's mid-belt, which marked the last days of the First Republic, that's the Belewa's government, came to an immediate halt. So the coup did something. It achieved an end to the wild, wild west, where people were pouring petrol, sometimes acid on each other. The Yorubas were killing Yoruba. The army was going to pull them apart. Some people were running to the barracks. Some moved to the neighboring country, Dahomey. Then it's now called Benin Republic. It was called Dahomey then. So thousands of people actually camped there. When this coup occurred, all that nonsense stopped. So people returned from Benin Republic. The TV rioting stopped. So if you can imagine, Nigeria has a huge sigh of relief that the country is not going to be torn apart, and at least lives are being saved. So therefore, there was a marked sense of relief throughout the whole country. This is before they called the Igbo coup, by the way. So throughout the whole country, there was a huge relief. The mood of the country was really portrayed by the national newspaper, so we're not making it up. For example, the Daily Times, Nigeria Daily Times, accused the politicians for the way things had gone wrong with the country and praised the new regime, that's the new military regime, for a manner in which it had effected, in other words, the way they have changed over without causing much public panic. There's a paper or newspaper that comes out every week called the West Africa Pilot, said that the January 16th would go down in history as a great day for Nigeria because it was the day Nigeria took a new lease of life. Then there's another paper called the Nigerian Morning Post, which is the official organ of the Nigerian federal government. That newspaper said, after accusing the politicians of Nigeria of thinking they had a divine right to lord it over the ordinary people, this newspaper said, we of this newspaper join millions of fellow Nigerians, fellow countrymen, in welcoming the dawn of this era in the history of our country. And finally, the new Nigeria, because the newspaper, which is predominantly of the northern Nigeria, observed that regionalism and tribalism had been the major factors that have precipitated the present crises. If we have learned that much, then some good may come out of what had happened. However, there's only one news agent that didn't agree with all these, and there's no prize for guessing which one that would be. And it states here that the only discordant note, the voice that didn't agree, was that of a BBC in London. Within 48 hours, would you believe, of the army takeover, the BBC correspondent dubbed it, labeled it, the whole episode as an Igbo coup. So the BBC was the one that actually kicked this rumor, this label, this mud, that threw it into Nigerian arena and said this is an Igbo coup. Within 48 hours of this happening, even though the whole country was celebrating, jubilating, BBC wasn't happy. So I just want to make sure we all understand that. In addition to BBC saying this, there were also some what we call expatriate people who used to be, well, they are from, let's say, Britain, and they'd gone to Nigeria to live there. They were treated as kings. They had servants looking after them. So for them, it was like, haven for them to live in. And they were, any change in their standard of living, they were going to resist it. They think that the changeover in the government is going to allow the Igbos to come from the south and challenge them for their jobs, because the northerners, they're having the Islamic schools, and therefore they lacked the Western style education. Now, I'm going to state it right from the outset. The Hausas, the Igbos, the Yorubas, everybody have the ability to learn. But what happened in Nigeria, they prevented them from doing the Western education because they didn't want Christianity to penetrate in those regions. So those who were privileged to go to school were emirs. I said last time that before independence, there were about 842 or so secondary schools in the south, and about 41, 42 in the north. So there's a discrepancy. So the expatriate people, when they arrived, it was a huge opportunity for them, but the only competition they had are people from the south challenging their posts. So they were aggrieved that the northerners are now going to be exposed to competition from the south. So they were not happy. So we need to look into the reason why it was labeled Igbo coup, and the whole thing unraveled as a result. So there were therefore foreign nationals living in the northern part of Nigeria, and the epicenter of this was a place called Ahmadu Bello University in Zaria. It's called Abu Zaria. They had two twin institutions. One is the Institution of Public Administration, okay, and that was based in Zaria. So the people who knew what was going on were Eastern students who happened to be living in that university, and they named the actual people, the Westerners, who were stirring up problem for Nigeria. Why am I saying this? Because on the 17th of January, they said to the students of the northern extraction that the death of Bello, that's Ahmadu Bello, who is the premier of the northern Nigeria, they said that his death, that they're going to use it, they're going to make his death a religious issue and attack the Igbos. So you need to note that what has happened, even though everyone else is celebrating, they're going to use the death of Ahmadu Bello as a religious issue and use it to attack the Igbos and get rid of them in the northern Nigeria. So that is part of the beginnings of the problem we are going to address. So whilst the rest of the country was celebrating, Aguiyi-Ironsi, who is now the head of the government, has to now find a way of managing what he has inherited. He didn't come out to do a coup, but he found himself at the head of army to stabilize the country and denied the revolutionaries, we call them, Nzewu in the north, and his colleagues, and also he defeated the Fajuna, and his colleagues in the south. So he took over in Lagos, and because he was in charge in Lagos, he was able to literally scupper or destroy the coup. And therefore, when Nzegu, instead of marching down south with his army to finish the job in the south, he decided to minimize the loss of lives by handing over and surrendering to the dictates of Ironsi, because Ironsi had the command of the loyalist forces in the south. So that is really the background I want to introduce our talk today, because whilst some people were celebrating, those in the north were not celebrating, because they need to now be radicalized, and the center of that radicalization was in Abu Zaria. They grabbed hold of their student population and started radicalizing them, saying to them, "Did you know what has happened to you?" It's like when you're at school, someone went to, English call it shit stirring. You're winding someone up to go and fight when there was no need for a fight. That's really what happened. So they did a good job in turning what was a revolution that everybody agreed was meant to, as the newspapers highlighted, was supposed to end all the suffering the lay people were having. So when challenged and said it was an Igbo coup, one of the people who were the coup plotters, called Ben Bulie, said that the truth of the matter, whether there's an Igbo coup or not, he said the truth of the matter, of course, was that the January coup was a coup of the progressive elements of the Nigerian armed forces. An intervention clearly necessitated by the breakdown of law and order in the country. I mentioned the Wild Wild West and the TV riots and so on. He then went on to say it was therefore neither an Igbo affair, nor, for that matter, an affair of any other ethnic group connected with it. So one of the people who were involved in the coup, they categorically stated that this has nothing whatsoever to do with an Igbo coup. So we now have, therefore, Aguiyi-Ironsi, who has inherited the plan changeover of the Nigerian, if you like, the Nigerian political scene. And he has to act as the head of state and try to work out how best to run the country. The problem now is, how do you pacify every group? So when Nzegu made his broadcast, said all the politicians are banned, no more politics, all the unions, everybody, you just have to listen to what the military has to say. They didn't relax. In other words, politicians asked to go away and let's just sort out this country first of all. So the politicians who went away in the south, they were being probed for all their actions. So they were lying low. In the north, they were, if you like, emboldened, because they're used to running the place. Nobody's keeping an eye on them. So the devil have worked for an idle hand. So they began to plot and plan how best to come back to power, as you can imagine. By labeling it there for an Igbo coup, that gave them something to work on. And that is what I'm trying to explain to us as to why the whole thing turned sour. So whilst Aguiyi-Ironsi was busy trying to organize the country, he didn't expect to be ruling, because he's a soldier, man and boy. Yeah, he started as a soldier. He joined the army when he was young, and he carried on up the ranks. He didn't go to university, just went to Jewish school and became a major general, very good at it. And he was able to represent Nigeria, United Nations in Congo. So he's done very well. He's not really one of those that say, I'm going to rule the country, because he was in military and was trained to respect and honor the law of the country. When the Queen visited Nigeria, he was one of those accompanying the Queen and so on. So he's not likely to rock the boat. Now, he's more conservative than being a radical. So his intention was not to rule the country, but he found himself, obviously, in the thick of things as the most senior officer who was supposed to have been killed, but he managed to prevent them from killing him and also managed to rally around loyal troops and stop further killing, and therefore saved what was then the Nigerian country. However, we have a problem because, a quick summary then, the coup had wiped away the old order. The Sardauna of Sokoto and the feudalist and aristocratic leaders of the north, they had emirs. Okay, so it was all centered around the Sardauna of Sokoto. As an autocratic leader is now dead, and his subordinates, which actually the federal prime minister Fala Bedewa was also dead. Chief Akintola was also killed, and he had been accused of vote rigging in the West, not only in the federal election, but also when the Western region went and had the elections, he was accused of vote rigging, seen by many Yorubas as a traitor to his people. That's what they had internecine fighting. Chief Ukachi, who was the finance minister, was an epitome which portrayed the worst part of political power, an excessive show of luxury, greed, and corruption, and was also eliminated, as well as many others who displayed the excess of the First Republic. Now, when all this was going on, the 27th of January, the mood of the country remained such. There's a newspaper article, said Nigerian Morning Post. What they had at this heading was bribe, capital letter bribe, question mark. Bribe, and then he went to say, he don't die. So bribe don't die. And then they say chop chop, he no day. So in other words, both bribery is dead and corruption is nowhere to be seen. So Nigeria was moving in a direction where the politicians ran it into ground, and they're now trying to repair things. So I keep repeating, it was very popular when we started off in the military coup. I know people have died, but that just in the situation, what Aguiyi-Ironsi did started was on a high note. People respected the military because the old corrupt regime was gone. What did he do? He promised then to consult with the people on the country's future style of government. And he resolved to dismantle his military regime as soon as possible. He appointed military governors in the form of Eastern Region, Northern Region. He promoted Major Castina to Lieutenant Kanu Castina to look after Northern Region. In the Midwest, you have David Ejo, Lieutenant Kanu Ejo, and Faji in the Western Region. These are the people who were under his militarity. They were his junior, but they were governors of those regions. And the rest of the Supreme Military Council were other people from the high ranking. So within the SMC, Supreme Military Council, there were about 3 members were Igbo, and there were about 8 of them which are not. So it was later accused of Igbos running the country and dominating everything. But if they looked at the composition of the Council of Leaders, you find there's very few Igbo people there. Now, so his regime was initially well received, and the idea is to keep the politicians at bay. He also looked at the ways of running the country, because being military, they're used to giving an order and everybody agreed with it. So one of the things he may have done wrong in some people's eyes is that he wanted to unify the country, which each time he tried to unify the country, they kill the Igbos. Every time he tried to unify the country, they kill the Igbos. So I don't think he learned from that lesson. He wanted to unify the whole country with one command as a supreme commander. So he went for the unitary structure. Instead of having the federation, he wanted to be like provinces, which would be better administered, unifying the civil service, or the way they run the country. Now, this will have a problem because the North have always wanted federal character. They always wanted their own way of doing things. You can't really force the Southerners on them. So that would be an issue. So I don't think he fully appreciated. So he was going for a unitary program to make Nigeria one big united country. He ran into trouble. He also wanted to, at the same time, to commission a constitution, people to look into constitution reform that was set up. All the constitutions given to Nigeria were given by the Britain. And there are so many of them, but 3 or 4 constitutions, each of them, none of them really address the people's yearning for unity as a country. They split them into several forms. So Aguiyi-Ironsi's regime decided to come with a constitutional reform. And then they're saying, in the finding, they want a constitution reform, a commission for it, and then have if you like, a way of implementing a new way of running the country, provided this is approved by a referendum. So he was willing to look into how best to run the country, and people will vote for it like a new constitution. He introduced his budget in March '66 and convinced people that the unitary government is the way to go. But he ran into trouble because the Northerners, in April 1966, one of them wrote in the newspaper that with regards to the Constitution, much has been written on the dangers and disasters brought on to the federal as a result of federalism. And the few who have the privilege to write on the papers, have gone to the extent of forcing unitary government. So the Northerners were thinking this is being forced on them without ascertaining the wishes of the people. By the way, what the country is running now is on unitary system. It's not really a true federation. Okay, one sad fact, the newspaper continued, was of these journalists as well, that some of the military top advisors refused to admit is that a Nigerian unitary government does not necessarily unite the people of Nigeria. So the fact you have a unitary government doesn't mean everybody is united. And he says, I say bluntly that nothing short of federation is good for Nigeria. Clearly, from the northern perspective, they want it to be a federation and not a unitary. Remember, when our people go up to the north, they're asked them to stay in Sabongari. They're not really mixing in the northern part of Nigeria. They stay in Sabongari. They're not really mixing. They're one country. They're seen as foreigners. They're called Nyamiri because when they got there, because of the thirst, they say, give me water, Nyamiri, Nyamiri. So Nyamiri becomes Nyamiri. And that's a derogatory term they use. But these people had the qualification which the British sought in the first place to help them run trains, telephones, and all sorts of things in what they call the modernity. And as they were doing this, they were receiving salaries. So they were able to set up schools, churches, and businesses. As they're receiving salaries, they're looked down upon or envied by the indigents, the locals, who find them, the sociologists call it privileged pariah. They are privileged because they got jobs, they got salaries, they have cars and fridges and all the modern amenities. But they are resented in their locality because the people there are not as educated and not getting the right jobs and so on. So they are privileged pariahs. So the point I'm making, they've gone up there and they're trying to develop the place. And the last thing after the coup that was required by the Northerners to open the door for more people from the South to come up to their country, their own part of the country, and take up what they call their jobs. After all, they instituted a policy almost like apartheid. If you remember, Ahmadu Bello said if there's a job in the north, he will get an expatriate to fill that post. If there's no expatriate, then you get another Nigerian, but it wouldn't be an Igbo, and so on. So his idea about the Igbo was really that they were taking all their jobs and their posts. So they coined this phrase, North is for Northerners, and Nigeria is for us all. So the idea then of unifying the whole country, which Ironsi's regime was bringing, was something they pushed against. That's really the point I'm making. Nevertheless, for unknown reason or without rather consultation, Ironsi went ahead on May 24th, 1966, to institute, if you like, the unification decree. He made a broadcast on May 24th to the nation, to the whole country, introducing his famous Decree 34. So, and to make the matter worse, he declared that the former regions are now abolished. Imagine what that sounds to the Northerners. You've abolished the Northern region, my goodness. And the Nigerian grouped into territories or provinces. The Nigeria ceases then to be as a federation, but became a republic. They wanted to become simply the Republic of Nigeria, not the Federation of Nigeria. So the North feeling threatened, they felt threatened by this potentially, if you like, the further southern and especially Igbo incursion into their sovereignty. This feeling of being swamped, by the way, the population then was around 22 million in the north, 22 to 29. And Igbo population, we realized the majority of them that escaped the pogrom was about 1.8 million. So if you imagine about 1.5 swamping 22 million is really, and they're all living in Sabongari, so they have nothing really to fear about Igbo people flooding into their place. But it's just a feeling whenever you have an immigrant population doing good, you want to stop them pouring in, as it were. So now, he attempted to therefore placate the North. He decided best introduced to go on a tour to explain to them why, from the military viewpoint, a unifying command is what has been brought up, and that's what he wants to use to run the country, not the civil servants in the North doing their own thing, those in the East doing their own thing, the West doing their own thing, Midwest, and so on. He wants to all unite. So when they say, this is what we want for education, everybody goes there. This is what we want for health, everybody goes there. The Nigeria has not been run like that before, because there are those in the North who are not willing to do what everybody else does. So it was a sudden change for them, which they were not prepared to embark on. So that is really the background. So Aguiyi-Ironsi decided the best way to get around this is to go on a tour to explain it to the leaders of thought in all these places. So he went on a tour to the northern cities, and these people have already started plotting and planning how to get rid of him because he's not listening to them. They want federation, they want the North to remain North and separate, but he wants them to be one big country. So there's some plotting going on, which I will talk a little bit in a minute. And they were saying to themselves, this guy's not listening to us, but don't kill him in the northern soil. wait till he goes somewhere else. So that is why they wait until he went to Ibadan, and that is where the assassination, the coup of 29 July occurred, which we're now going to address. So that's the background to what we're talking about. The second coup was orchestrated by those in the north. And how did they go about it? Remember, the BBC has said it's now beginning to look at an Igbo coup. So they used that as a clue, if you like, as a cue rather, to begin to manipulate the information. It doesn't matter what Ironsi does. It's an Igbo coup. It's an Igbo conspiracy to take over and rule the country. So they briefed their students in Abu University. The politicians started going around telling people what's happening. The journalists picked it up. The radio broadcasts were broadcasting Ahmadu Bello and Tafawa Balewa's speeches for a whole 3 weeks non-stop on the radios. Everybody in the north was being, if you like, not just radicalized, they're being hypnotized, saying, our leaders have been killed, and Igbos, we hate Igbos. So the anti-South feeling was amplified. You know they don't like them in the first place. If you look at the transcripts from the House of Parliament in the north, if you care to read them, it's, we mustn't allow the Igbos to stay here. We should send them all home. Where did they come from in the first place? Is the British that brought them here? Well, the British have gone. Why can't they now go home? We don't want them here. The land should be removed from them. They shouldn't. If you read racist remarks, which you thought, are we one country? What is going on here? So that is the background to, literally poisoning the mind of the people. So while Aguiyi-Ironsi and his team were trying to unify the country, those in the north are busy using all the available propaganda to turn the minds of the people, who initially celebrated the takeover by the military because of the corruption that was going on. So the newspapers, which in Hausa, like Kaskiya Tafi Pambu, I can't say it because it's Hausa language. There's a newspaper in Hausa which was obviously writing all this up. They had the television, they had Kaduna radio, the journalists were writing, the politicians, and they were having meetings, serials of meetings in place in Nasarawa Club, which people from the south weren't allowed in. So they were making plans there. So the accusations which they had of the Aguiyi-Ironsi's government was that, you see, those people who killed our leaders, those people who killed our leaders, they in fact, they've got promotion whilst they're being detained. Where does that one come from? When you looked into the one they're accused of being promoted, there's someone called D.C. Okafor and D.O. Okafor. One of them was involved in the coup, and the one they promoted was not involved in the coup, but they thought the person who they promoted was one of the coup makers. Then they talked about, you see, they're still receiving their salary. For goodness sakes, are they on trial? Are you punishing them? Or why are they being paid their salary? Well, the law says you should pay them their salary until they're found guilty. You see, you can tell when you're using propaganda, you can really turn the mind of people and not looking at the facts. All the people want to hear is that, they're being paid. They're receiving their salary, even though they killed their leaders. There's a section in the army manual, I think section 149, it says here, and 50, says that the military forces ordinance number 26 of 1960, in which part 7 on pay forfeitures and deductions. What means forfeitures? The law says you're going to lose your pay or you're going to have a deduction. It states that pay should continue before a verdict. Now, if people that did the coup, you say they are guilty, you don't want them to receive their pay. The law says they should carry on receiving their pay until we have a verdict that you find them guilty. But the propaganda was overdrive and saying they're being paid. So that should stop. It's not fair. They killed our leaders and they're still paying them. When are you going to punish them? Well, Aguiyi-Ironsi instituted, if you like, he instituted an investigation. I mentioned last talk about the guys, G-U-Y, if you like, people he instituted. I call them the Northern guys. G stands for Gowon, U stands for Usman, and Y stands for Y is one of their Yusuf. So these are prominent security officers who were asked to look in to why the coup occurred. And if they find there's an evil coup, well, we have to address it. They searched and searched and searched. Over 200 officers were interviewed. 3 months it took them. They didn't find an ounce that it was an evil coup. But the propaganda is still saying it's an evil coup, but they haven't got the evidence. When they reported, they said, no, we can't punish these people because we're waiting for, there's going to be a white paper. General Effiong was part of the SMC, Supreme Middle Council. In one of the meetings, he said it was pointed out that the National Security Council looked into this particular thing they call the white paper, was to be published soon, and it was inadvisable, to take a precipitant, to rush in and make a decision about what to do with these, what they call national heroes. They're revolutionaries. They wanted Nigeria to be united. They got rid of the corrupt politicians. So what do we do with them? Well, we want a white paper before we accuse them, before we charge them. So before government explanation to the form of white paper. So they were waiting for this to be published. So the National Security Council met to consider security and propose a white paper. So, but the general public in the North, they were not waiting because they've already found them guilty and they want action straight away. And I have to remind you that everyone who was involved in that coup, some of them were in prison, some in places called in Midwest. The Nigerian soldiers drove all the way to that prison after the coup of July. They drove into the prison, freed up the people who were locked up, killed the Igbo and the Southern Part members, and took their own members, the Northern people who participated in the coup, took them with them home, but killed their counterparts. So basically, they were wanting these people to have, if you like, extrajudicial killing. They want them killed for killing their leaders. They didn't want them to be tried. So that's what was happening. Even some of them that survived the war, like Omar Tuegu, they lured him into a place after the war and killed him. So every single one who was participating in the coup somehow were killed. So the point I'm making is that whilst Aguiyi-Ironsi was struggling to run a country which he didn't want to be thrust into the limelight, but he wanted it to be stabilized and law and order restored, then the politicians will come back after we have a constitution and restructure the country in such a way that it will work for everybody. So you stop killing civilians and the people will vote properly and so on and so forth. A lot was done. He went out of his way, and part of the demands of the mutineers, if you like, the Zegu revolution, was to release Awolowo. So it was Aguiyi-Ironsi who set in motion the release of Awolowo. But if you asked an average Yoruba person, say, "Oh, Gowon released Awolowo," so no, he didn't, because Gowon and Ojukwu had arguments about who should be ruling or running the country. Gowon, Ojukwu didn't take orders from Gowon. So if Awolowo was in Calabar prison, they would not have released Awolowo to Gowon, because Gowon didn't have any authority over Ojukwu, because they tried to kill Ojukwu and failed. We'll come to this. So Aguiyi-Ironsi has done a lot to stabilize the country, but lo and behold, there was a plotting going on to get rid of him. This time was by northern Nigerian troops. These northern Nigerian troops, the name of the plan for their coup is Operation Aure. A-U-R-E. That is a Hausa name, a Hausa word for marriage. Operation Aure was what they call the counter-coup against the January 66. They had a deliberate, slow, systematic planning of this coup. And the center of this planning, as I mentioned earlier, is Abu Zaria, Ahmadu Bello University Zaria, where they worked a lot of details in northern Nigerian civil servants and politicians to execute the whole, to in fact involve the entire northern civilians and their military counterparts to take part in the coup that led to the actual massacring at industrial scales of people of Eastern origin. So Operation Auri was what the military in the north used to kill Aguiyi-Ironsi. The leader of this coup is Colonel Murtala Mohammed, who was a major and promoted to lieutenant colonel. So let me get into it. Operation Auri was what they call the return match. Yeah, I didn't know that the coup January 1st, the 15th, was a match. It was an undertaking to restore sense to Nigeria that was killing lots of people in the western region and the Tivi region. So they now labeled it a return match, but don't know which the team were they actually playing against for it to be a return match. But it's a return match because they feel that people were killed, therefore they're going to turn and kill the Igbos. Very strange. So, as I said, the Operation Auri was Aure. I don't know how you pronounce it. I have to apologize. A-U-R-E. If you are Hausa, maybe to say it properly more than I can. It's what they use also as marriage. But when they're talking about and planning it, they're talking about Paiko's wedding. Very clever. Paiko's wedding was the nickname and the hometown of the Niger province of one of the northern sub-lieutenants of the 14th Battalion in Ibadan. This is where the whole thing is set. It was to do some coordination of the battalion's action. So the plan was to take place on the 28th, 29th of July, when Ironsi visits Ibadan. As I said earlier, it's part of his national conference where he's meeting the traditional rulers to explain to them this unifying decree, the unification decree, which he has launched. He's been to North and has now come back to Ibadan. After the conference, the governor, military governor of the West, Ukachi, they met in Congo and they've been friends, decided to persuade him to stay overnight in Ibadan. And then he had his son with him. His son came home from London on holiday. So what happened was that these particular people have planned thoroughly how to get rid of Aguiyi-Ironsi. Their ringleader was Murtala Mohammed, and they had planned how best to get rid of him. And an opportunity came, therefore, when he came to Ibadan. The mechanism that they used was to make sure all the military formations in the south, in Lagos, in Abeokuta, in Ibadan, everybody was in the know about the coup. The northern soldiers, they were so determined to do this. What Aguiyi-Ironsi did wrong was that in his attempt to pacify the northerners, he actually surrounded himself. In other words, his bodyguards were mostly from the north, because if he surrounded them with people of Eastern origin, say, hey, see, favoritism, see, the Igbos are everywhere, now he picked them as his bodyguards and so on and so forth. Well, prevention is better than cure. Safety first. But anyway, he fell for that, and his guards were actually of northern origin. So that makes life very, very difficult. To cut a long story short, he was staying in the lodge, in the governor's lodge in Ibadan. The plan was to surround him, which they did. His guard, who were looking after him, the person in charge of them called a parade and disarmed them, changed their weapons, and then issued the weapons again only to the northern members of that unit. It's very clever. They've already, I think they killed some at Abeokuta. When somebody found out that this is what they're planning, they killed the person, the Igbo guy, and two of them, someone called Obielu, and I think it's Komu, but his exact name. They killed them. Obielu was one of those who was supposed to be involved in the January coup, but he changed his mind at the last minute. And he was one of the ones they killed, regardless, even though he didn't participate in the coup. So anyway, the news went round. They phoned their colleagues in Lagos. The Lagos told that because Murtala Mohammed was in charge of the whole thing, they were planned to do that day, and so they would think they might have been compromised. So they were waiting for the order he gave them to go ahead. So T.Y. Danjuma was the one who was supposed to be guarding Aguiyi-Ironsi. But there's an issue here. Aguiyi-Ironsi and his tour should have been accompanied by Gowon, but Gowon didn't follow him. If it's not Gowon, it should be somebody else next to Gowon rank, like Anwuna. Again, Anwuna didn't go, but the younger one, T.Y. Danjuma, was the one they sent. T.Y. Danjuma was the part of the presidential guard. So he went to Ibadan, and they've decided that day they're going to kill the commanding officer. So they surrounded him, haven't disarmed everybody around there, and only given the weapons to the northern people. So, and they didn't want to, they had a gun, an anti-tank gun. The issue here was when Sadwana Sokoto was attacked, his gate was well armed, well protected with alarm and so on. Nzegu and his team used an anti-tank to break in. So they also had anti-tank weapon to shoot and blow up the house where Aguiyi-Ironsi was staying. They chose to wait for him to come out, because when he comes out, then they can grab him rather than blow up the house. How can I describe it? So the person who was asked to go and see what's happening outside, because they were getting suspicious, was I think it's Lieutenant Colonel Njoko. Njoko came out, and as soon as he saw them, there was an exchange of rifle. They shot him. He escaped and limped to Ibadan teaching hospital, and where they followed him, and after a short brief of treatment, he managed to escape. It was said that one of Aguiyi-Ironsi's guard, who's a HAUSA person, came out to investigate what was going on. He was asked to sit on the corner, take his shoes off and wait, hands up and so on. So you can see what's happening. The head of state was now being isolated. He's got Faji with him. And each time they send somebody, that person doesn't come back. So they knew something was happening. So Aguiyi-Ironsi hid his son inside the wardrobe or some place in the house and told him what to do, how to get back to Lagos in case he doesn't make it. So T.Y. Danjuma, after waiting, as he entered the lodge, he heard a phone call. Apparently he had a phone call, and that phone call was from Lagos, where Gowon was. And Gowon answered, said, "What is going on?" He said, told him they're about to, storm the place. And Gowon told him, according to the instruction, that Gowon asked him, T.Y. Danjuma said they've surrounded the place and they're going to arrest the head of state. So Gowon saying, "Can you do it?" And I said, "Yes, he will." And so he said, "For God's sake, no more bloodshed," according to Gowon. He doesn't want any more bloodshed. But this is just what people are saying. It's difficult to know the veracity, what that meant, whether it means so don't kill him or whatever. So T.Y. Danjuma then went inside with a group of northern soldiers into the lodge, and he had a hand grenade in his hand and pulled a pin. So if you shoot him, everybody there will be blown up. So he was willing to die if his attempted coup failed. Attempted assassination attempt failed. He had a grenade in his hand which primed. So the people around Aguiyi-Ironsi inside, they pulled a gun, but the military that was following T.Y. Danjuma had a lot more soldiers who had the automatic, semi-automatic rifles with them. So they couldn't really shoot their way out. So T.Y. Danjuma then asked Aguiyi-Ironsi, why he hasn't, how come he was involved in the coup that killed all these Bello. So Aguiyi-Ironsi said to him, he doesn't know what he's talking about. He was not involved. Then he said, "No, you are. And why haven't you arrested? Why haven't you tried those people who are involved?" So anyway, they had an exchange of discussion. So T.Y. Danjuma pulled out his epaulette, pulled out his clothing, and so on, and they arrested both Faji, who was doing the Yoruba thing. If you're going to get somebody as my guest, they have to take me first. So Faji is actually a very brave soldier. He's one of the first Nigerian to receive commendation when he went to the Congo. So he received an award for his bravery in Congo. So he stood by his commanding officer, his head of state, and so they took both of them and drove them off in the Land Rover, where they tortured them, bouncing them on the Land Rover as they were driving, and then got them into the bush and shot both of them. And while they were shooting them and interrogating them further, some of their guards escaped. So the issue now was nobody knew what happened to them. So they said the head of state is missing, and we now have a vacuum. So who's going to be the next head of state? They've killed Aguiyi-Ironsi, and the next in line, rank-wise, is Babatunde, Brigadier Gundipe. So Gundipe is Yoruba. He's the next in line, but the issue with the Yoruba forces in the army is that there weren't enough of them. Apparently 800 or so Yoruba troops in the whole of Nigerian army, compared to 10,000 soldiers, majority of which, the infantry level, 70% were from the north. The officers were Easterners, all right, but majority of the officers were Eastern, about 60%, but 70% of the military force, the infantry, were from the north, although majority of them came from the Midwest, as Gowon's territory. Now, we don't have any head of state. Ogundipe, Yoruba guy, cannot step into the shoe because when he gave them an order, they just ignored him. They weren't going to listen to anybody in the south. It's going to only be from the north. Gowon, they picked, happens to be at least, I'm told, about 5 to 6 senior officers above him. But they picked him because they got the gun. So he became the de facto leader. Now, so what is the problem here? The problem is, Ojukwu phoned when they heard that the coup was going on, because I forgot to mention that whilst they killed Aguiyi-Ironsi, they triggered the plan for the coup. So every single military formation, you sound a bugler, Ravali or whatever the military call it, like a trumpet. Everybody comes out for a parade. As you all lined up, they got the guns, and if you're Igbo, they pull you out and loaded you in a car somewhere, in the van, and they go and kill you. So all the Igbos in all the military formations were really vulnerable. Those who escaped are those who were on shore leave or outside the compound, because they call a parade, a mustard parade, everyone comes out, and then if you're Igbo, they grabbed you and killed you. So that's how they killed most of the Igbo officers, literally decapitating the whole of the, if you like, the military of Igbo officers. They ethnically cleansed the Nigerian army or anyone from the south. They spared the Yoruba people, but they killed the Igbos. So we have an issue. We have an army now, a military, where people from one particular ethnic group were being massacred at will. And the commanding officer be killed. But when this situation was about to be replicated in the east, where Ojukwu was, they heard, Ogunewi, I think his name is, heard there was a coup going on. So he quickly locked up the armory and disarmed the soldiers, who were most of them were northern origin. He disarmed the army and locked up the rifles in the armory. He locked it up. Ojukwu was taken to the police headquarters, where they had some guard to make sure he was safe. So Ojukwu did not fall as a result of this coup, because it was a nationwide thing. The interesting thing, in the eastern region, then they only had one unit, the 1st Battalion in Enugu. But it appears that the other formation, the Nigerian military, were all outside. They were all outside the eastern region. And in Lagos, you had one in the north. In Lagos, you had Western region, you had 4th Battalion in Ibadan. You had the field artillery in Abeokuta, the 2nd Reconnaissance Squadron in Abeokuta, and of course the Lagos Garrison, which was in Ikeja. In Enugu, we only had 1 battalion, that's in Enugu, but everything else was in the north. That's the Zaria, or the recruit training depot, Nigerian Military School in Zaria, Kaduna, where they had a factory, the 6th Battalion, the Nigerian Air Force, they had the Reconnaissance Squadron, the 44 Military Hospital Ordnance Depot, Nigeria Artillery Academy, Military Academy. Everything was really in the north. Now, if you're someone from an eastern part of the country and you're Igbo, each time the military called if you like, a morning parade, you come out and you're Igbo, you get killed. Those who escaped, they have to find their way home from the northern part of Nigeria to make their way back to the south. When they got to if they managed to get into the train, they changed in their mufti, but they're wearing army boots. So you can tell they're actually soldiers, but they're escaping south. So when they get to the River Benue, Makodi, they have to cross in the train. And those trains were searched for fleeing Eastern origin soldiers who killed them. So basically there was a rampage in there throughout the whole Nigeria where the military had access. In fact, one of the people first to be killed was someone called Captain Ekenam on Carter Bridge. They just looked at him, oh, Igbo, they just, you're Western, you're Eastern, and they killed him. So the Igbos became very vulnerable. So what's happened here, strategically, they've taken out the cream of your people who would be in a position to protect. So strategically, they planned this, they killed your military first, and then there'd be nobody to protect the civilians. So that is how the actual pogrom that occurred in the north, because you didn't have your soldier trained people to come protect the Igbo people. They were all being killed. And the police wasn't there to help. And it's a long way home from Kaduna to Enugu. And the train you're using to make that journey is searched. So those who managed to escape were very few. I believe on that night, over 200 and something, I've forgotten the exact figure, of army officers were killed of the Igbo origin. And then they turned on the non-officers and started massacring them. They then precipitated the killings that followed the mass, killings of all the Igbos. So this coup we're talking about, they call it revenge coup. They call it the Araba coup. They were actually planning to kill. It's like blood vendetta. They're trying to kill people, and then part of their plan is to separate, to go away from Nigeria. So that's why it's not just the Araba. Araba means separation. So the two things I want to talk about is that who then became the head of state. Go on. And what was the purpose of this coup? Not only to kill Aguiyi-Ironsi, kill Ojukwu, kill all the army officers as a revenge. They were then going to pull out of Nigeria and have a northern, if you like, have their own country, northern Nigeria. They were seceding. And we knew this because on the 29th of July until the 1st, Nigeria didn't have any government. So we're finding who was going to be the government of Nigeria. Nobody knew who was going to be, because there was a debate as to who would be the new head of state. Murtala Muhammad could have been the head of state, Adamu could have been the head of state, but they found that Gowon, being, if you like, from the Middle Belt, and Middle Belt had the majority of the soldiers, was the only one they're going to listen to, and nobody from the South. So Gowon ended up being chosen as the head of state, but it took several days before he can come and make a broadcast. Remember, the rioting was for Araba, separation. So Gowon was being pushed, declare secession, declare breakup, so they were really hounding him to make that decision. So, because, as I said, part of the reason why they did the coup, so that the North could be freed from the rest of Nigeria. Now, it's not only therefore revenge for what they call the Igbo coup, okay, which in effect was an all-party coup, all ethnic group coup, but they labeled Igbo coup. And so that's one, the revenge for their leaders. And the second reason, the real reason, was secession of the North. They want to break away from Nigeria. Now, So, because the evidence showed that as soon as this coup occurred, Lieutenant Colonel Gowon set up a base at Ikeja barracks in Lagos. And there was a flag flying in front of the main gate. This flag was left there for a whole 18 days, and it's not the green, white, and green flag. This flag had lateral red, yellow, black, green, and khaki stripes. It was the flag of the Republic of Northern Nigeria. It flew in the gate of Ikeja for 18 days. For 3 days, what they did was to make the hijacked or commandeered buses. The military commandeer means you have a bus going, just wave and put a pointed gun and the person jumps out, you take it. That's commandeering. They commandeered buses, lorries, cars, trains, even planes to take everyone who is from the northern origin, the western region. They transport them to move their family, all the soldiers' families from the north, move them back to the hometown. So they were literally pulling away from Nigeria. So now I'm going to tell you finally about the second coup. So why didn't they pull out of Nigeria? Okay. Who formed Nigeria? The British. Yeah, I hope you guys are awake still. If the British formed Nigeria, they're not going to just fold their arms for you to break Nigeria up. So this is the real, I don't know how to explain it. This is the second coup of the January, of July 29th. I call it the second coup. Why am I calling it the second coup? Because the British stepped in. You want to break up Nigeria, do you? Okay, all right, okay. So Gowon was having a chat with the British High Commissioner. His name is Sir Francis Cumming Bruce. It was said that by high authority that they spent at least 6 hours in private session talking to Gowon. Yeah, on the morning of the 1st of August. Gowon then reported back to his fellow Northerners. There were back and forth exchanges. Now, let me share with you what actually happened. And the question here is pen mightier than the sword? The question is an English phrase. The pen is mightier than the sword. So, Q, the British High Commissioner, Cumming Bruce. Cumming Bruce appealed so Gowon was having a chat with him, and according to the conversation, I'm told, Gowon said he's only a simple soldier, he doesn't have any experience in affairs of the state, let alone taking on a huge country like Nigeria. Ojukwu teased and said Gowon is like a small child with a broom trying to sweep the whole house of Nigeria. It's not really able to do that. So the immediate problem then facing Gowon at that time, because North was pulling away, was total disintegration of Nigeria. And the North was intent on secession. It was only through the support of Cumming Bruce, this British High Commissioner, who was a close friend of the Northern Emirs. It was through this High Commissioner that they were able to exert authority on the North. Cumming Bruce later explained that he was able to persuade the Emirs that secession from Nigeria would have been an economic disaster. So this is from the ambassador himself. He said, but it wasn't on the face of it easy to get them to change. But I managed to do it overnight. This is what I did. I drafted letters to the British Prime Minister, I believe his name would have been Harold Wilson, And then, after drafting that letter, for Harold Wilson to send to Gowon as Nigerian head of state, and for my Secretary of State, let's go Michael Stewart, to send letters to each of the emirs. I wrote an accompanying letter to each of them because I knew them personally. I drafted all these and they all came back to me duly authorized to push on at once. The whole thing was done overnight, and it did the trick of stopping them dividing Nigeria up. I don't know if you guys, those who are listening, understood what has happened here. That Britain, 3,000 or so miles away, intervened, preventing the Northerners from seceding by just writing letters to the emirs. Why? Because they played polo together. So it could be a polo coup. But it's very serious. Britain had not formulated a policy in view of the event of the second coup. The British haven't a clue. What on earth? How did this happen? And that the British representative, he said, as the British representative, I should decide on policy as I see fit. Now, what Britain does is they look at the man on the scene. Tell us what you think we should do. And that's what hurt Biafrans anyway, because someone called Hunt, who was the High Commissioner during the war, was the man on the scene, and they listened to everything he said, and not really listened to someone from Enugu, who was a British representative, telling them what was happening to Biafrans is unbelievable. But Hunt has already made up his mind, he wants one Nigerian. So they look at the person who's on the scene, who they will listen and follow, regardless of what they see outside. So they love to look at the person on the scene who give them an advice of what they think is appropriate. That's how they train their people. So anyway, so this ambassador saw to it what he deemed to be fit for this situation, being the man on the spot. He says, hence my action with the emirs. I have particularly cordial relations with the emirs because we all share the love of polo. I told you it's a polo coup. Polo, by the way, is where you use a horse and you chase a round ball and you hit it with a stick, and they love it. It's the sport of the aristocrats. And so that's the polo. They love the polo, and of course, because of what we met, because of that, they meet socially, and his position also meant that we met on more formal occasions. So they've been inviting him to polo matches and so on. However, I have been totally unaware of an impending coup. They didn't tell him. My security people had heard of no rumors to unseat the Ironsi regime. However, my relationship with Ironsi had been somewhat distant. I always felt that he didn't entirely trust me, perhaps because of my personal relationship with the mayors and the sultans in the north. So that was probably the reason the second coup caught me by surprise. So why I have to read this so that we all understand that lurking in the background was the British and their embassy. They heard there was a coup. The country doesn't have any leader. So he composed letters back home to his prime minister. His prime minister and the secretary of state then wrote letters to the emirs, and he backed it up, and they all knew each other, and everybody said that, look, if you secede, okay, economically, you're going to be in big trouble. Okay? Economically, you're not viable. And that is why Lugard, while we're all in this Lugadian cage, Lugard joined North and South Nigeria because the South provided the means of running the North. And that is even before the oil was discovered. No, I didn't quite mean that. Oil has been discovered around 1908. They kept it to themselves. And then in 1958, they say, oh, we got oil in the mercantile quantity, meaning enough to sell. But what they didn't tell us during the war was that there's more oil than they let on that they discovered. And they were using Biafran oil as a strategic reserve because there's an Israel Arab war which sealed the Suez Canal. The Arabs revolted and said, we're not going to sell the West any more oil. So the Biafran oil was really the driving force that made Britain, go against their natural instinct, the natural sense of fairness which the Igbos loved, and turned against us because they've got to get this oil, this sulfur-free oil, which is driving the whole thing. So before I drift away from our topic today, I've told you why Ironsi didn't succeed. Those in the north didn't want a change in government. In spite of what has happened, they celebrated at the outset. But then using the power of propaganda, if you keep telling lies over and over and over again, people begin to believe it. It worked in Nazi Germany. It worked in anywhere you use propaganda. That is why our media need to be very, very careful with educating our people, telling them the facts and so on, so they could make up their own mind. So the use of media to call, if you like, an all-party, all-ethnic coup in Nigeria, the first coup in January, and you turned it into an Igbo coup and used it to massacre the Igbos, it takes some doing. It really takes some clever editing, clever propaganda. They used newspaper, they used radio, constant playing of the voices of Ahmadu Bello. See, they killed our leader constantly, so much so that every single northerner came to hate the Igbo with passion, so that they only stopped killing us when there was no more Igbo person left in the north. That's how serious this is. So I'm going to stop there for now, because there's a serious issue about what happened to Nigeria when the January coup struck. They thought they were going to rescue the country, but the Northerners had their own agenda. And they felt very hurt, and someone told them it was an Igbo coup, and they changed their mind. And then they turned on the Igbo. So now, in the military, you don't have any more Igbo left in it, because you killed them, and they can't come back into the military. So how on earth are you going to have a country where you don't have people from other tribes? So they were actually killing all the Igbos so that they can break away and go their separate way. But what kind of nonsense is that? Yeah, if you want to go away, go away. And somebody said it's a return match. Okay, so the people you killed is in excess of the people you're trying to revenge. And that's why he says, vengeance is mine and I will repay. Because mankind knows if they're doing for revenge, someone stepped on your toe, you end up chopping off their knee. The whole thing is so out of proportion. The amount of people they kill out of proportion to the ones they feel they needed to be revenged. And they forgot that the reason why those 16 January coup occurred was because of all the people that have been killed throughout, in the TV region riots, the Western region riots, and so on. So those people are human beings as well. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. So Mazi, Jonathan, because the story can go on all night. But I thank you all for listening. But I propose that next time Next talk on this history session will be about the pogrom, having killed all the soldiers of Eastern origin, and very few of them left in the army. They now have what has been labeled as an uninhibited killing of the Igbos in the north, the eastern region, uninhibited. There's nobody there now to prevent them. They had a dry run in May when they killed people after the Decree 34 came out. Aguiyi-Ironsi was the head of state then. He sent the troops to stop them killing people. But when Gowon took over, he didn't do anything to stop people being killed. So I'll finish by saying what Gowon, according to Gowon, when he came to power, he said the basis for unity is not there. Why would he say such a thing? Because they are planning to pull away in the first place. And then they have to rewrite, if you like, they have to rewrite what he was meant to say. He said the basis for unity, when everything is taken into account, is no longer there for Nigeria. And yet, they did an about turn, and SADC, when they precipitated the killing, they turned round and said you have to stay in the country and come back. You're not going anywhere. We'll kill you to kick you out. We'll kill you to bring you back again. So if anyone has any doubt who did the coup of July 69, they are all northern troops. Lieutenant Colonel Maritana Mohammed was the leader. Major Martin Adamu, the 2nd Battalion Lagos. You had Theophilus Danjuma, Principal Officer of the Army, Headquarters Lagos. 2nd Lieutenant Sani Abacha, 3rd Battalion Kaduna. Yes, it's Abacha who became the leader later on in Nigeria, coups. Then Lieutenant Abubakar, yes, you know. Then you have Colonel Akahan, who is the 4th Battalion. Then you have Shitu Alo, who is the Air Force Headquarters. You have Lieutenant Ibrahim Babangida, yes, he was there. 1st Reconnaissance Squadron, Kaduna. You have Lieutenant Ibrahim Bako, the 4th Battalion. Then you have, as you know, Lieutenant Muhammad Buhari, the 2nd Brigade Lagos, he was involved. Then you have Captain Isa Buka, who is the Federal Guards Lagos. Lieutenant Colonel Dambo Yakubu, 3rd Battalion Kaduna. Lieutenant Gaba Idada, 4th Battalion Ibadan. Sergeant Paul Dixon. I'm just listing their names, so if you have any doubt whatsoever who carried out the coup, they're all from one section of the country. Lieutenant Bakasuka Dimka, you know the Dimka fame, yes, it's a military college in Kaduna. Then Lieutenant Gaba Dura, 1st Reconnaissance Squadron, Kaduna. Captain Joseph Gaba is, of course, Federal Guards, Lagos. Lieutenant Muhammad Balarabi and Haladu, who is 4th Battalion in Baden. Then you have Major Abba Kyari, yes, they're all there. Artillery, Kaduna. You have Sergeant Sambo Kwale, Abeokuta Garrison. You have 2nd Lieutenant Muhammad Gado Nasco, Artillery, Kaduna. You have Malami Mehi Nasarawa, 2nd Battalion, Lagos. You have Onaja, 4th Battalion, Ibadan. You have Corporal John Shagaya, Reconnaissance or Abeokuta. You have Shelling, who is the company commander for Battalion Ibadan. Captain Ibrahim Taiwo of the famous Saba massacre fame. You have Paul Gabriel Taffa, Federal Guards, Lagos. Usman Baba, Headquarters. Musa Usman, Headquarters Air Force. William Walby, 2nd Battalion, Lagos. Maman Basta, you heard all these names, 4th Battalion, Ibadan. Abdul D.S. Wire, Kaduna. Jerry Seni. So all these famous names were involved in the coup, so they know what they were doing. And you understand our dilemma. And so, by God's grace, the next installment is to tell you how our people, those who escaped, how they managed to escape, and how they found Eastern region, if you like, a haven where they could find rest after fleeing from the north and from the west. And that's what we're heading towards Biafra and its declaration. I stop so far, Mazi, so may the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be accepted in thy sight, O Lord, my strength and my redeemer. Thank you very much.
There, Mazi, before you make your or give your patent shows, Mazi, in this aspect of history which you talked about Major General Aguiyi-Ironsi, he tried to appease everybody, which led to his demise. He tried, to build start doing something, building a Nigeria that is good, yes. But he never took consideration of insecurity. I heard when you said just the way it is. When they told him, no, he's about Igbo, look at his bodyguards, all Igbos, and he tried to appease them by putting people that are non-Igbos, surrounding himself up with people that are non-Igbos, which led to his demise. So, now my question, I want you to, is it out of ignorance or bad calculation, or is the way we are wired? Because I see it that, he is not mentally strong, which is also what is going on today. Our people, they always try to appease foreigners, even to their detriment, more than anything. So, what do you think that is the problem? Is it a psychological problem? Because before you start thinking about building a good country, this and that, you have to look at, you have to at least, in a place like Nigeria, a complex place like Nigeria, you have to sit down very well, plan your thing without falling to people's, cajoling. So what do you think in that case, and what do we learn from there, please, Mazi?
Yes, thank you. It's a very important question. If you're brought up in a village, when someone comes to a village, you don't go after them and start harassing them. Yeah, in the village I grew up in, you don't harass them. You welcome them. It's in our nature to be welcoming to strangers. The good book says, by so doing, you may have entertained angels unawares. I don't think those who are welcoming strangers, entertaining them, know much about the possibility of pleasing a higher order, those who created you. So what I'm saying, Mazi, is that there's an inbuilt welcoming nature in us all. But some people, when they see a stranger, they go after them, like the British. But when the British come to you as a stranger, you welcome them. So I think it was Chinua Achebe who said the stranger came with his foolishness, and we laughed at him and we welcomed him. Now he's put a knife between the thing that put a knife, the thing that unites us. That is in our nature, in other words. So, but in the military setup, to be fair to Aguiyi-Ironsi, yeah. In the military setup, there's something called the spirit de corps, where the people you train with, there's a chain of command. When that attitude saved his life in the first coup, he just came out and he saw the troops about to arrest him, or say, you shouted at them, get out of the way, because he's that strong, yeah? And they give order and the people obey it. That is in the military. Now, what he didn't want to be caught out with, because he's conscious of the fact, they might say, it's an Igbo coup, and he would have heard about it. So people were promoting a Lieutenant Colonel Gowon, yeah? Gowon just arrived the day of the coup, and he saved his life. They were going to kill Gowon, but he helped to save his life and made him, chief of staff in the army. Okay, so therefore, but when it was Gowon's turn to return the favor, when he realized that the Aguiyi-Ironsi was surrounded, and Tiwa Danjuma was told, yeah, can you do it? Can you arrest him? Yes, I will arrest him. I can do it. He could have told him, stand down. Leave the man alone. Don't touch him. Don't harm him. He could have said that, but because they've already plotted and planned, and the Easterners, my opinion, the Northerners, what they're going to do. So he was in on the coup. So the hospitality thing is very, very in us. But in the military setup, you have to be very cautious. Okay? You have to be very, very cautious, because people could be planning and plotting against you without you knowing. And he's playing the I am a detribalized, and therefore I can be fair to everybody. So I don't think it's because he doesn't want to be accused. It's just in his nature to be fair to everybody because of the way he was brought up. Yeah. So in those stages, remember, this man speaks fluent Hausa, he speaks Yoruba fluently, he speaks Igbo fluently, he speaks English. So he's been exposed, and he's been to Congo, where he is the general, United Nations general in Congo. So he's well exposed. So it's difficult to turn around and say, why didn't he fortify himself with only Igbo officers? They would have accused him of being, if you like, what do you call it? They would have accused him of being biased, which is not in his nature. But what we can all learn from it is that you have to put safety first. If I was in that situation, I would have made sure the person I trust are people I can trust, if you see what I mean. They've learned. You just have to learn that it's people you trust. I suppose during the war, your VAT man or whatever who came to be if you're an officer, is somebody you really, really know. And but you may not have any choice who's going to be your sergeant or whatever in the army. It's just the nature of the army. So I've got to be to answer your question. I would say it's a combination of both. Where his upbringing, his hospitable nature, the military he was trained in to look after all ranks, and not to be biased. But Nigeria wasn't ready for him, so he paid the ultimate price for it, unfortunately. And that's more or less it.
There, Mazi. Honestly, it is very, very sad, honestly. And the reason why history, I mean, this history is being revealed is for us to learn. I hope so. Because I believe it doesn't matter your upbringing, though it plays a role in your life, but once he enters political arena, you have to assume another stance for
interest first.
Yes, self-preservation. I call it to maintain self-preservation. That is what I see. Good. So thank you, Mazi. And please, before we go now, please go on to your patent shot before we go, please.
My closing is that I've talked about 2 coups in Nigeria now. The first one was by the junior officers. They really were keen to make Nigeria better. If they learned the history in the past, when the British were there, every attempt to make Nigeria better leads to killings of the Igbos. And I don't know why that is, because they blame us for trying to improve the country called Nigeria, because we want it to work for everybody. So, as a parting shot, if we understand that as Igbos, we need to, as what Mazi Jonathan is saying, self-preservation, it becomes something you have to take seriously. And our own people says, one who's hated or rejected by others, you can't reject yourself. You need to come up with a new strategy as if you like, as people, as Biafrans, to understand that because you're hated, and I don't know why, you can't hate yourself. You should be even more stronger in uniting and making sure self-preservation is the best form of, if you like, you have to learn to preserve yourself, and then to be able to put your interest first. We don't. This is not being selfish. Preserve yourself. You ours is a duty to thine own self be true, and also love yourself before you can love anyone else, isn't it? You're told to love yourself as you love your people as you love yourself. If you don't love yourself first, it becomes a serious problem. So, as a parting shot, I'm learning a lot from what has happened to us in the past. And as a child that survived the Biafran War, it means a lot to me to go back and look at all these things which nobody taught us about. And I can assure you for free, one of the early books I read was all about Biafra. I couldn't get my mind off the topic because nobody was teaching us. Nobody explained it to us. So you have to go and study it and understand what has happened to us as a people. And from there, you will become a better person because it's a history. It's your history. No one is going to, explain it better than yourself. So I urge you all, support BEAD, Biafran education, awareness, dissemination is so critical to our survival. So because once you know what has happened to you, then you know how to avoid it becoming, worse things happening. If we fold our arms and keep quiet, worse things could happen because we have not learned anything from the past. And as you say, I think it's Hegel, the German philosopher, he says, if we have learned anything from history, is that we do not learn from history. What we learn from history is that we do not learn from history. We have to physically learn from what has happened to us. And that's actually how the body works. It responds. If you have an infection, it has the immune system ready for an attack when the same bugs comes back. That's a natural thing to do. That's a self-defense. So I urge you all to learn, read about Biafra, support measures to educate us about our history is really, really critical. Thank you very much for listening. God bless you all.
The Mazi, we have had it all, Biafrans and lovers of freedom. We must continue in making sure that we tell our own story by ourselves. Because for a very long time, we have been relying on foreigners and strangers and our enemies to tell us our stories. And the essence of this history, writing our own history, is for us to learn from history. But the issue and the big question is, do we really learn from history? That is a question, a rhetorical question that should be answered by each and every one of us. Remember, we are on our Biafra Heroes and Heroines Remembrance Month, of which 30th May will be the peak, and there will be a total lockdown in Biafra land for us to remember those that died that we may live. Thank you for listening. Biafra remains our religion, our ideology. Therefore, we must continue. Our goal is the restoration of Biafra. and we must continue having this experience of what happened to us. From me, Mazi Jonathan Chinedu, from here together with Dr. Lois Ukachi, it is simply good evening.